In Cleveland, strikers vowed to stop the scabbing and were mostly successful. Now, at the start of the morning shift, a scab attempted to plow through the picket lines at a high rate of speed. Strikers flooded the gates and brought the scab car to a virtual stop. As they attempted to convince him not to cross through, mounted police viciously charged and attacked the strikers. Police continued to shoot tear gas guns from behind plant gates. Soon, there were more than 5,000 picketers fighting with police as workers poured out from half a dozen nearby plants to support the strikers. For over 2 hours, workers showered strike-breaking forces with bricks, rocks, and paving blocks. They overturned scab cars and drove the police off the street and into the plant. Fighting broke out again in the afternoon when police tried to bring in more tear gas supplies. Strike leaders directed activities from an amplifier on the roof of a nearby restaurant. The next day, famed Prohibition crusader Eliot Ness, now Cleveland's director of public safety, enforced a 500-yard riot zone, banning all gatherings near the gates and limited picketers to 7 at each gate. Strikers began picketing the homes of known scabs and would ratify a new contract just days later. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. This hour, we're going to spend a little time enjoying the week that was. And what a week it was indeed. The first State of the Union address. And I got to be honest with you, right from the start, I fell asleep watching it. There was no energy. There was no... in fact, I looked at it, and as I was watching, it looked to me that he didn't even understand where to break for applause or where the punchlines were half the time. Now, this is a guy who railed on Obama for years about using a teleprompter. So I found his speech to be very interesting, and I'm sure insomniacs the world over were thrilled to have something to fall asleep to. Now, for me, there was a bunch of stuff that I would have liked to have seen in that speech. One, I would have liked to have seen him say, we're going to protect steel. We're going to save the steel industry because, hey, I ran on it. And we're going to move on the 232 case to make sure that American-made steel doesn't go the way of the dinosaurs. Seemed like a good start. I didn't see him talk a lot about manufacturing and how, plans to bring jobs back. A little bit about vocational school stuff, but how? Didn't see much of that. Made lip service to infrastructure. And again, the infrastructure plans, always very interesting to me. Because understand, we just did a major tax bill, a major tax handout. Call it a heist, call it a scheme, call it robbery, call it whatever you want. But we just gave away about $1.7 trillion over the next decade. That's money that could have easily gone to do, you know what? Rebuild our roads and bridges. Yet what we get out of Donald Trump and what we're getting out of the Republicans is this scheme, is another scam, is another way of going, hey, there's a fairy out there that is going to sprinkle dust on us and going to rebuild our infrastructure. Understand, the only way our infrastructure gets rebuilt is if we rebuild it. These schemes, these scams, these magic plans that we're going to put, $200 billion up and somehow that's going to become $1 trillion. I'm sorry, I'm not really getting that. Unless we're going to put toll booths on every corner, unless we're going to pay huge amounts of rent down the road that we, the taxpayers, eventually pay for anyway. And this is the kind of dishonest stuff that people hate about our politics. We need to rebuild our infrastructure. We're about $4.6 trillion in the hole, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. About $4.6 trillion. And yet we're talking about $200 million and then hope that Wall Street's going to come along. I'll be honest with you. Every scam that they've come up with, every scheme that they've come up with, it seems to be all about Wall Street. It's all about Wall Street, and it's all about sticking it to not just the taxpayers, but to the working people. I saw nothing in his speech that said to me he cared about the middle class, that he cared about a prosperous working class. I didn't see it. I saw some words about unity. I saw lots of division. I saw some words about, this is kind of an idea, but to be honest, they're not his words. They're not his ideas. So how long is it going to take before he forgets it? And we're back at this division point, still not moving forward on our infrastructure, not moving forward on sane trade policies, not moving forward on a lot of things. We're just stuck, what seems like in neutral and in chaos. And the reality is it's always the working people who get the shaft. Across the nation and in my home state of Pennsylvania, there's been a calculated, constant, and extremely well-funded attack on unionized workers and the standard of living of all workers. If politicians and right-wing think tanks aren't attacking the right to organize collectively and bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions, they're attacking unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and prevailing wage laws. These attacks are never, understand, they are never for the benefit of workers. They're not for the benefit of families, not for the benefit of communities, or even taxpayers, as they're often framed, but simply and solely the benefit of corporations and shareholders. There's a new study released by the Midwest Economic Policy Institute that looks at the effects of Indiana repealing its prevailing wage or common construction wage law. And to be honest, it reinforces, I think, everything that we already know. It's more for the wealthy and less for the workers. And here to talk about this latest study is Frank Manzo. Frank is the policy director at the Illinois Economic Policy Institute. Frank, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So, before we get into the meat of your study, which, lots of interesting findings, and I would argue not all that surprising, before we get into it, I think it's important to explain exactly what prevailing wage laws are, maybe discuss a little bit why they're important to local communities. So let's start with Indiana. What was the common construction wage law there in Indiana? How was it calculated, and what did it cover?
Yeah, sure, Rick. And prevailing wage is a law that supports blue-collar construction workers on public construction projects, and that's true across the country. In Indiana, it is essentially a minimum wage for projects supported by Hoosier taxpayers. In Indiana, the rates were determined by the most common construction wage. That's why it's called was called the Common Construction Wage Act. And so what that means is the modal rate. So the rate that's most paid to the most construction workers in a county, that's the rate that must be paid to workers as long as they can do the job, they have the same skill set, and they can perform the same job duties with the same equipment as everybody else. So everyone must have been paid the same prevailing wage and benefits rates as long as they could do the work, and that's true regardless of demographic characteristics. So that rate was determined democratically at county board meetings and leveled the playing field for contractors bidding on public construction projects.
And why is that important for a community? Why would you want to have this prevailing wage?
Yeah, so a prevailing wage upholds local construction standards and it keeps jobs local. So if in a particular county the cost of living is higher, the common construction wage should be higher. It should be higher than what it is in other counties. And so it would support a middle-class lifestyle in that county. So construction workers in a particular county can afford to live where they are building a school, a road, a bridge, or other public construction project.
What do you say to the person who says, well, why do we want a local construction trade? Why shouldn't we be able to get people from wherever to work as cheaply as possible so that we can get the lowest price possible for our construction needs?
I guess what I would say is that there are unintended consequences to that action, right? So if common construction wage is repealed, then a little bit about what we found is wages go down. And if wages go down, certain other unintended consequences happen. It makes joining the construction trades a less attractive option for any kind of young, talented men or woman, right? So it makes it less attractive to join the construction trades while at really the worst possible time, because we are facing a skilled labor shortage across the country for skilled construction workers.
Right. I also make the argument that, I kind of want, if my kids are going to sit in a classroom or if I'm going to walk into a building, I kind of want, the guy who built the building, his kids to be sitting next to mine, because I want to make sure that building is built the best. The roof is the best it can be. The walls are as strong as they can be. I don't want somebody who's going to come through, put up some shoddy work, and then head off to the next place. I want the best possible bang for our buck, and also the best construction we can get.
And that's exactly what a prevailing wage law does. It provides skin in the game for local contractors, but really what it does is it ensures that projects are done right, on time, under budget, and up to local construction standards.
Right. One of my favorite arguments from the people who want to do away with prevailing wage, and you hear this all the time. I actually had an ABC contractor tell me that if Pennsylvania were to do away with its prevailing wage law, much like Indiana did, that we would save up 25 to 30% on construction costs. And after I was done laughing at him, because, as someone who knows a little bit about this, not a lot, I know that construction costs, labor is about a quarter of the cost of things.
Right.
How would it be possible to save 30% on a building project by gutting labor? It's impossible.
It is, in fact, simple math that labor costs only account for between 20 and 25% of total construction costs, as you said, Rick. And so it is simply impossible to save 20% on project costs. And that's what former Governor Pence and his allies had been saying prior to repeal and in favor of the decision to repeal common construction wage in Indiana. It is impossible to save that much on construction projects unless construction workers were to work for free, which is obviously not going to happen.
But actually pay back to save 30%. So what did you find in the study? I mean, look, there have been a number of these studies over the years, and what we generally find is once you do away with these safeguards, you end up gutting wages, you end up screwing things up and making things worse. Tell me, what did you find?
Yeah, and what I should say is that this is the first study of its kind to look at what actually happened following repeal of a prevailing wage law in a state since the 1990s. And that looked at 9 states that repealed their prevailing wage laws in the 80s. So it's the first of its study in quite some time. And our research, and I did this study with Professor Kevin Duncan, who is an economist at Colorado State University. What we found is that repeal decreased blue-collar construction worker wages by more than 8%. And so repeal was not good for the working class. What we also find is that repeal worsened income inequality and that the wage cut was concentrated at the lowest end of the income distribution. So by eliminating that minimum wage floor, low-income construction workers actually suffered more and suffered a 15% wage cut. The result of all of this is that worker turnover increased because low-skilled construction workers entered the industry and the skilled construction laborers exited the industry, looking for other high-paying jobs in industries that, value their work a little bit more. So that turnover of low-skilled workers entering the industry and high-skilled workers exiting then also resulted in a relative slowdown in construction worker productivity, which is bad for the industry, it's bad for the economy, and bad for taxpayers.
So let me just get my head around this, because
Sure.
You're telling me wages went down, productivity went down, all of these negative things, all of the negative things happened, and yet we didn't get buildings done on time. Did we save any money?
Right. So Professor Duncan and I analyzed over 900 bids on 300 school construction projects in northern Indiana, and we found that repeal had no effect on school construction costs in particular. So there was no change in the cost of building a public school. And the assistant Republican leader in the Indiana House actually said as much recently and said that taxpayers have not saved a penny from repealing common construction wage.
So if that's the case, and again, understand the sales job. The sales job was we were going to save 30% on construction costs. We were going to be able to build a ton more. We were going to be able to fill all of our needs. The communities weren't going to suffer. The taxpayers are going to be fat and happy. It was going to be great. It was going to be utopian. And yet what you're telling me is all of the negatives have happened and none of the positives have happened. So why do this?
Yeah, Rick, my expertise is in policy analysis and not necessarily political commentary. But I will say that, especially since 2012, bills to repeal prevailing wage have been accompanied by a host of other legislation that is aimed at reducing worker wages and benefiting the very, very rich. So I think it's worth kind of simplifying it in that fashion and saying that there are politicians and elected officials who have received generous campaign funds from wealthy individuals that have a particular agenda, and this is part of that package.
Yeah, it goes back to something my grandfather always said. If a rich guy's going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you you don't need something, you better spend two to get it. And I look at all the money that's being spent on all of the whole anti-worker cocktail, the whole no rights at work agenda, and this is just one part of that to make working conditions and to make wages worse. And for the average taxpayer, I think it's important to understand the reverberation effect of having decent wage jobs in a community and a local construction trades. I mean, that benefits the local butcher, the local movie theater, the local restaurant. That income reverberates through the economy, and when you have transient labor coming through, that money just leaves.
Yeah, exactly. And and again, I think a lot of what we find is that repeal has really had those negative consequences for local communities in Indiana, and has failed to produce any taxpayer savings on school construction costs and other public projects, while also failing to increase competition, which was another component that those who oppose prevailing wage said would happen following repeal. That the actual data shows that big competition hasn't gone up, but that there are lower wages for hardworking middle-class families.
And for me, that's the point. So the other question I've got, because one of the things they always sell is that if we do this, you can have more building projects. There's obviously the same amount of money, and it'll go further and do more projects. Any reality in that? Did you find any of that in your studies that they actually took on more projects because of taking this away?
Yeah, one of the indicators we looked at was public works employment. So the total number of construction workers employed on heavy and highway jobs that are, in particular our roads, bridges, those types of works. And so what we kind of expected to see, if that was the case, was that public works employment would have gone up by a lot more in Indiana than it did in neighboring states that still have prevailing wage laws, those being Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio. And what we found is that public works construction actually increased more in the three neighboring states that still have prevailing wage laws and pretty strong prevailing wage laws. And it increased more in those states than it did in Indiana following repeal. So the evidence, at least indirectly in that case, does not appear to be that prevailing wage induced more roads or more schools for less cost. And as we talked earlier, the cost didn't change at all anyway. So that's kind of the mechanism by which there was no change.
Again, another one of these wonderful things brought to us by conservative economic ideology that, again, doesn't live up to the promises and ends up in the long run screwing workers and communities and taxpayers alike. It's insane to me, and it's angering to me. And I appreciate the work that you guys do in this study, and I hope people will take a look at it. I hope people will finally put to rest this idea that we need this kind of to do away with prevailing wage. At some point, you've got to stop.
Yeah, well, and this study, we hope, and Indiana's experience really should be a lesson for lawmakers and elected officials in other states that are right now considering repealing their prevailing wage laws. In particular, Michigan and Missouri. I know other states have considered it as well. We hope our study influences the policy debate because those claims that you mentioned can be put to the test, and that's exactly what we did. And what we found is that repeal has had negative consequences for Indiana.
Last question. Anywhere that prevailing wage repeal has actually benefited workers, taxpayers, consumers, anywhere where it's actually worked as it was sold?
To the best of my knowledge, no. And it hurts the lowest paid construction workers the most. So there is, and I guess you could say that it hasn't had as much of an effect for certain construction workers, but it is negative across the board, and in particular, most negative for those who with the lowest skills and who are the lowest paid.
And again, as you said, lowering wages, but not lowering the cost for taxpayers. Gee, I wonder, that's mighty curious. But Frank, I appreciate the work that you guys do. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Great stuff. I got to tell you, and the thing that gets me is, for years I've been talking about this issue. I've been arguing about this issue, and you look at this report and it lays out what we already know. And that is that the poison that they've been feeding us, this idea that if we just lower workers' wages, if we just chop them down enough, we'll be able to save a ton of money. And study after study has shown us, going back 20, 30 years, that it just doesn't happen. And that when you steal from workers, when you take from paychecks, when you take from families, when you take from communities, where does it go? It goes into the handful of the handful. It goes into the pockets of the well-to-do. And, at some point, I hope we wake up to this. Because, and I told the story a minute ago, I remember the first time I heard that argument that, Rick, we could save 30% on building contracts. We could build more stuff. And to someone who doesn't really know, it sounds, hey, that sounds great. Let's do that. Until you get into the nuts and bolts, until you get into exactly what does happen. And what happened is exactly what Frank laid out. Lower wages for workers, lower wages for skilled workers, even lower wages for unskilled labor construction workers. So you make that inequality between the skilled and the unskilled even greater. And oh, by the way, the bids don't get any cheaper, the costs don't get any cheaper, and the buildings take longer to build. They're not on time. They're not the same quality. And I go back to that question. If all of that is true, if all of the negatives are what we get and the positives that they sell us never come to fruition, why do our elected leaders pursue it? And it's pretty simple. It's what the wealth class wants. It's what the billionaire class of this country wants. It's what the employer class wants. They want desperate, pliable, and exploitable workers. It's that simple. Any of those working people who have a voice on the job, they want to crush. This is an attack on unions. It's that simple. And the attacks come from every direction. And it shouldn't be any surprise to anyone. It just is. It is what it is. So I'm, again, not surprised. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You got any prevailing wage stories? Love to hear it. So this week, President Trump took to the podium and delivered his first State of the Union address. It was chock full of the usual doublespeak and the sleight of hand that, well, one expects from a well-trained used car salesman trying to pawn off the worst lemon on the lot to the next unfortunate sucker to come along. And while, he did speak a little bit of unity, most of the words sparked division and even fear. Throughout the speech, I couldn't help but think, how many hours is it going to be from this moment right now before Trump forgets the words of the speechwriter and reverts to himself? My grandfather always said, there are people out there who would lie when the truth would be better. Donald Trump appears to fit that mold. We've seen numerous reports in the Washington Post and publications across the country saying just how often our slippery salesman runs afoul of the truth, runs afoul of reality, and it makes you wonder. The latest work detailing Mr. Art of the Deal's record is titled Art of the Lie. It's been released by Democracy 21 and the Common Cause Education Fund. And here to talk a little bit about their report is Stephen Spaulding. Stephen is Chief of Strategy at Common Cause. Stephen, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So here we have the State of the Union address this week. Again, chock full of very interesting statements. After a year of more than 2,100 lies, mistruths, just not even anywhere close to reality. And here we are starting year 2 going, how much worse can it get?
That's right, Rick. And I think what we've been saying over and over again, the refrain is this is not normal. And we have to be reminded of that because it really seems like every single day you wake up, you check your phone, the constant flood of breaking news alerts and tweets from the president, really confusing reality. It just becomes overwhelming at times, becomes overwhelming a lot of the time. And so what we did at Common Cause with Democracy 21 was really try to document in the last year, his historic failures on issues of government integrity and accountability. I mean, it's hard to really know where to start. We know that he really flouts the rule of law and has, frankly, authoritarian tendencies. We saw that with his statement that he says he, quote, has an absolute right to do what he wants with the Department of Justice. He has, of course, an unprecedented number of conflicts of interest all over the world. He's likely in violation of a number of different conflict of interest rules, one of which is the Emoluments Clause in the Constitution. So we've heard a lot about that, but there's also lots of other things that are just not normal. For example, we document in the report and remind people that he personally interviewed candidates to be U.S. attorneys, the chief law enforcement, federal law enforcement prosecutors in jurisdictions that could oversee Trump properties. And it's never been the case that a president would personally interview those people. Mr. Trump did. We know that he is overseeing efforts to potentially hobble an accurate census in 2020. We need an accurate census in 2020 because that helps determine how the government distributes $600 billion in funding for infrastructure, for the Children's Health Insurance Program, for Medicaid. So there's the big abuse of power, obstruction of justice, attacks on the courts. But then there's things about interviewing U.S. attorneys, his $107 million inaugural slush fund. He said that money was going to go to charity. We haven't seen any evidence of that beyond a couple checks to the American Red Cross and some others for maybe 3% of the total that he raised. So this tries to put in one place 20 of those examples and to remind people to document it. And it's a place that in next year or in 5 years, we can look back at that first year and see the seeds of what has really been a reckless, failed from the start presidency, and really document the art of the lie. Because we've never had a president, again, that we're aware of, certainly no president, who has lied more than 2,100 times in his first year. That comes out to an average, as the Washington Post calculated, to 5.9 a day. Here we have a president who is supposed to be filling key government roles throughout the administration. He has to fill over 4,000 of them. About 630 with some change are particularly important positions. And as of today, 240 of those, he hasn't even named a nominee. Both presidents, H.W. Bush and George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, had far more people in position. So this just scratches the surface, but we hope this report, you can read it. It's very user-friendly, we think, on our website at artofthelie.org, and you can see those 20 examples.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of those. But, here's the thing, and this is one of the questions I'm sure people are going to throw out at you. You start the report with a quote from Senator Patrick Moynihan. Everyone's entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts. And then you lead in with the statement that President Donald Trump is a nonstop, habitual, and compulsive liar. While I absolutely agree with you, this, I don't know that's going to be able to reach across the aisle and bring people in.
Well, the important thing is that we have to remind people about where we are today. We have to remind people about how unprecedented this is. I mean, I think that actually, if you look at the polls, Republicans, Democrats, Independents are all uniformly very concerned about the tone of this president and about the lies that he continues to tell. So we're going to continue to call that out and document it for history's sake, because we have to correct the record. We all know that he has a capacity for stretching the truth and that he lives in his own reality. And a number of Republicans on Capitol Hill and Republicans across the country at the state and local level recognize that. But it's quite shocking when you realize just the sheer number of mistruths and misleading statements and outright lies that he's told. We have to know who we're dealing with if we're going to move forward at all.
Right, which is why I think that what you've compiled here is important for everyone to take a look at, because, taken individually, you take it, the media is no good. They're all criminals. They're the enemy of the people. Yeah, that in and of itself is, while dangerous, not overwhelming. Throw in all the lying, throw the attacks in on the Justice Department, on our judicial system. You just go down the list and compile all this stuff. And it appears that you have someone who has authoritarian tendencies, who wants to tear down every institution and consolidate power within one branch, which, again, I don't know anybody who's in favor of.
And even beyond that, even beyond his attacks on institutions like the courts, his attacks on the press, calling it fake news. I mean, that's just the start of it. Calling it the enemy of the American people. What he's been doing is, again, attacking any institution that would hold him accountable. And what we're seeing this week, he tried to turn the page this week with the State of the Union, but what we're seeing this week really is a lot of reporting about his efforts to coordinate a cover-up of any of his misdeeds related to the 2016 election. We know that our intelligence agencies agree that Russia attacked our elections. They didn't use kind of bombs. They used bytes and bits. They used cyber efforts to influence the American electorate. He fired James Comey and said himself, he told Russian officials in an Oval Office meeting that he did it to take the weight of the investigation off of his back, that Comey was a nut job in his words. And then reporting comes out that in June, he ordered the firing of Special Counsel Mueller. He fired Sally Yates. He's fired people that would hold him accountable. Fortunately, his White House counsel, the real anti-hero in this whole fiasco, said he would resign if Trump followed through on the order to fire Mueller. But it's a pattern that Trump tries to shut down any institution, whether it's the press or the courts or his own Justice Department special counsel. He tries to shut down anyone that would try to hold him accountable. And at the same time, refusing to put the weight of the presidency behind the fact that we were attacked and there are steps we have to take to protect our elections moving forward. The 2018 midterms, I know we just started 2018, but they're 9 months away. And we have yet to shore up our election infrastructure, close cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and take steps to ensure that what happened in 2016 isn't going to happen again. I think Americans have to ask themselves, who is he working for when he says absolutely nothing in this week's State of the Union about the attack on our democracy and continues to really distort the truth?
Even as his CIA director, Mike Pompeo, says the Russians are going to meddle in 2018 like they did in 2016. It's very strange to me that you would have the president maintaining this, there was no collusion, there was nothing happened, nothing to see, move along kind of attitude, when his own people are saying there's there.
Exactly the problem, and why we need Congress to really put, again, country before party and move forward on its investigations. The House Intelligence Committee investigation, which is led by Chairman Devin Nunes, I think can't be trusted anymore. He was on the Trump transition team. He clearly has a conflict of interest. He hasn't told the truth. There is a Senate intelligence investigation happening, as well as a Senate Judiciary Committee investigation. We still think there should be an independent commission that doesn't even necessarily have to look at whatever culpability the Trump committee may have had, but can look at what happened in 2016, look at what is happening in 2018, as our intelligence community is warned, and determine what steps we need to take to better secure our elections, starting, number one, with voter verifiable paper ballots, with ensuring that our registration lists are modern and secure, and bolstering cybersecurity. I mean, that's step one. That really should not be a partisan issue. And there actually are some Republicans in Congress that are willing to move forward on that, but unfortunately, it's perplexing as to why the president completely left that out of the State of the Union. I mean, what could be more important than protecting our democracy? And he left that completely unaddressed. So, we're going to continue to hold Congress accountable and urge our members and everyone listening to hold members accountable to demand hands off the investigation and to take steps to protect the integrity of our democracy, and particularly on election security, given the concerns that we have, not only about further interference from Russia, as we saw in 2016, and this was confirmed, but other countries are even non-state actors.
You know, do you have faith in our judicial? Do you have faith in our congressional system? Do you have faith in the hearings? Do you have faith in our elected leaders? Because look, I look at what the Intelligence Committee did just recently with the Nunes memo, where they voted to release everyone is saying was cherry-picked information from Nunes, and they voted to not allow the Democratic Party's their representatives' memo to be released. Do we have any faith in the system right now?
Well, certainly not. I don't have any faith in the House investigation, which is really, devolved into this kind of partisan food fight, which is really unfortunate and really dangerous. There is, as I mentioned, a Senate Intelligence Committee that has been moving forward, but I would suggest that there's been a vacuum that allows a lot of conspiracy theories to bloom that could be ameliorated if there were open hearings in public in front of the American people so that we can decide and see for ourselves, who is asking what questions, what those witnesses' reactions are, and everything else. I mean, there are other investigations moving, and we have to continue to make clear that we're watching what's happening and demand an independent investigation, and hopefully at some point get an independent commission to look at the vulnerabilities in our system and to make suggestions for solutions moving forward. But when it comes to Congress, you're right. Speaker Ryan should remove Nunes from having anything to do with the intelligence investigation in the House and give committees in the Senate their space to move the investigation forward. But we really need more public and open hearings. We need the testimony to be made public. A lot of this information is not classified, and Americans have a right to the truth and to know to follow the evidence really wherever it goes.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I hate making the comparisons to Watergate, but we do need to know whether our president's a crook, a liar, and a thief.
Well, the issue is he has, as I've mentioned, he has tried to shut down every single investigation and institution that is trying to hold him accountable and investigate. He has been flouting really any efforts to, again, be held accountable. So to get to the answer as to what actually happened, we need the institutions of Congress, those investigations. We need the courts to do their job. We need citizens to do their job and the press to do its job to eventually get to the truth and follow it wherever it may lead. But the answer to that question will, I think, come once the investigation wraps up, so long as he doesn't try to further shut it down and obstruct justice. But once we know sort of the outcome of especially the special counsel Mueller's probe, that I think will dictate next steps to really discover just what the contours of obstruction of justice were, what kind of abuses of power that we're dealing with that are beyond what we already documented in our report, and to eventually hold him fully accountable, and of course ultimately determine if he decides to actually run for re-election. We know he says he's running for re-election, but the ultimate accountability then comes in 2020 if it doesn't happen before then.
If it doesn't happen before then. Last question I've got for you. What are your hopes from this report, Art of the Lie? What are you hoping people take from it? What do you hope the next step is?
Well, I know it can be a pretty depressing read, but I hope that what people take away from it is we've got a big challenge, but that American democracy is resilient. It's proven to be resilient, but it takes citizen action. It takes the accelerated civic participation that we're seeing. And I think that hopefully will motivate people to stay engaged, because that's the only way that we're really going to win and save what we love, as they say in the latest Star Wars movie. Don't spend your time fighting what you hate, but saving what you love. And that is what I hope citizens across the country and your listeners will do as we continue to ride a very turbulent time in our country's history.
Good stuff. Stephen, I appreciate the time. Best of luck. I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Good stuff. Stephen Spalding, he's the chief of strategy there at Common Cause. And again, the report, Art of the Lie, highly suggest take a look at it. Well worth the read. And look, as I've said before, you take one piece in and of itself, maybe not all that troubling. Put this all into one picture. Scary times, and time to get off the couch, get active, get engaged, get involved. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, Rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
Brought to you by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor organization representing 200,000 transit workers in the United States and Canada. The ATU works to promote transit issues and fights for the interests of its hardworking members and riders.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day striking auto workers in Cleveland, Ohio, defended their picket lines in what is known as the Battle of East 140th Street. Members of UAW Local 45 at GM's Fisher Body Plant had been on strike for 3 weeks. They had joined striking GM workers at 12 plants throughout Michigan. They demanded a supplemental agreement granting skilled workers wage increases, overtime adjustments and seniority, and apprentice provisions. In Cleveland, strikers vowed to stop the scabbing and were mostly successful. Now, at the start of the morning shift, a scab attempted to plow through the picket lines at a high rate of speed. Strikers flooded the gates and brought the scab car to a virtual stop. As they attempted to convince him not to cross through, mounted police viciously charged and attacked the strikers. Police continued to shoot tear gas guns from behind plant gates. Soon, there were more than 5,000 picketers fighting with police as workers poured out from half a dozen nearby plants to support the strikers. For over 2 hours, workers showered strike-breaking forces with bricks, rocks, and paving blocks. They overturned scab cars and drove the police off the street and into the plant. Fighting broke out again in the afternoon when police tried to bring in more tear gas supplies. Strike leaders directed activities from an amplifier on the roof of a nearby restaurant. The next day, famed Prohibition crusader Elliot Ness, now Cleveland's director of public safety, enforced a 500-yard riot zone, banning all gatherings near the gates and limited picketers to 7 at each gate. Strikers began picketing the homes of known scabs and would ratify a new contract just days later. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. You know, I'm still stuck on the opening line from Art of the Lie, the report put out by Democracy 21 and the Common Cause Education Fund. President Donald Trump is a nonstop, habitual, compulsive liar. I don't know how much clearer you can get. I don't know what's more to be said. And as they point out, 2,100 lies last year alone, something like 6 every day. I mean, honestly, I can't think of something that I like that I'd want to do 6 times a day. Let alone make stuff up. Anyway, what we saw this week was a very low-energy Donald Trump who read very slowly off a teleprompter. And you remember when he used to beat up Barack Obama all the time for using the teleprompter? Yeah, I know. Too long ago. But his lengthy droning was, I'm sure, something perfect, a perfect cure for our insomniacs. I dozed off about halfway through, woke up the next morning to read it, and found out the second half wasn't any better. Here to talk about the State of the Union, our good friend Pete Dominick, comedian and host of Sirius XM Stand Up with Pete. Pete, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick Smith, anything for you, buddy. Great to be back on your show, man. Thanks for having me.
So did you make it through? Did you get all the way through it?
Well, I mean, first of all, it was 80 minutes long, Rick. It was like the 3rd longest State of the Union in recent memory, if not ever, I think I read. And I tried to get through because there's a kind of a therapy that I get out of, a catharsis that I get out of live tweeting it and fact-checking and bashing the president for all the lies and everything else he was doing. But about 40 minutes in or so, it sounds like about the time that you made it to, I just got too disgusted, and the work I'm doing in therapy just wasn't enough for me. I was going to lose it. It was when he was really demonizing immigrants and calling them all criminals. I just couldn't take it. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to be a good father or a good husband if I keep watching this tonight. I went to bed.
Yeah, and the thing is you started off by calling for unity, and then that. I mean, did he read the speech? I mean, I understand. Look, there's somebody else's words. I get that. But did he actually bother to read it?
I've argued that many times. It seems like the first time he's delivering a speech he's given is also the first time he's read it. He is one guy on script and obviously a completely different person off script. And part of that is the disparity there is because he doesn't read at all. He's not obviously curious about policies. He doesn't talk to the heads of intel agencies, the most powerful people in the world. He'd rather, talk to Sean Hannity or some commentator. And so he really doesn't. He's just not curious about the issues. So that when he delivers something off the cuff, he clearly has no idea what he's talking about. When he delivers something on a speech, it sounds like he knows a little bit about what he's talking about because he can link words together, clearly words that he doesn't normally reference or use, but he delivers it with absolutely no energy, no personality, barely any commitment to the material because he's completely unfamiliar with the material. And usually, at least, there would be some kind of a passion that you could see come through because the politician delivering the speech actually believes it. But we didn't even see that. He barely knew when to inflect. And then, of course, he was clapping at his own stuff, Rick. That was really...
And the loudest of all clapping. The best, the loudest, the greatest clapping of all.
As a stand-up comedian, that really irked me. You really aren't supposed to laugh at your own stuff. And when you're the President of the United States, you're definitely not supposed to clap. Maybe when you're paying tribute to some of these people, of course, that he brought with him. But that's about it. Otherwise, you just look like you're clapping for yourself, which, of course, is not a surprise because it's also really all he's ever done is applaud himself for every failure.
Yeah, again, you talk about unity at the beginning, and then we're right back to the flag again.
Yeah, well, he doesn't. I mean, he really is. I've been very critical of him in terms of that in every way that his talent doesn't lie in any arena, any expertise, Rick. But he is actually very good at dividing people. He was very good at dividing people in reality television. That's what reality television is. He's not unlike your Sean Hannity's and your Rush Limbaugh's, the divide and conquer to get ratings. But the difference between entertaining and infotainment is if you're a slave to the ratings, if that's what you need to get to succeed, that's one thing. But when you're in governance, when you're a mayor, a governor, and obviously the President of the United States, dividing people only works up to a certain extent. At some point, you've got to try to bring people together. And especially after a national tragedy, which I'm not sure if you heard, he said he thought, he told some news outlet he thought that maybe the only way for Americans to come together would be a national tragedy. And it, of course, sounded frighteningly like he was rooting for one.
Yeah, did that scare you? I mean, it was at a private luncheon before, and I guess this is what they do every time before the State of the Union, bring a bunch of people in and have a private lunch. And he did. He said the only way people come together is when you have a major event. And I have this theory of him is whatever goes in his ear comes right out of his mouth without being filtered whatsoever. So is someone talking about a major event? Is someone in a room that he's in saying, hey, this could happen?
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, the fact that he is talking to people that are not serious people, that aren't experienced policy people, from Steve Bannon to, Seb Gorka, who used to be in the White House, he's still making phone calls to conservative commentators. Alex Jones said last week that the president actually calls him, and I still haven't heard any reporters ask the president or his spokespeople if he talks to Alex Jones, a guy who thinks the Sandy Hook shooting was a myth, was a government operation, a false flag. I don't know who he's listening to or how he's making any decisions ever, because he's gotten nothing but seemingly bad advice from people who don't have any consequences for giving it because they're outside of his administration often. But yeah, I mean, a spectacular terrorist attack or natural disaster would be horrific, especially a terrorist attack where he would want to, like many other leaders, many other presidents who are less extreme than him, retaliate. And we know this guy likes to punch anybody who punches him or even lightly grazes him with a verbal insult. He punches back very hard. And unfortunately, as he likes to let us know, he's got his finger on the button.
And his is bigger, evidently, from what he said. But, here's the thing. As a comedian, I mean, is there anything funny in all of this? I mean, the reality is I wake up every day going, are we starting a war with North Korea? When is all the chaos going to hit? I'm more worried, concerned, scared for the future of my kids. I think about the Supreme Court. As a comedian, how do you deal with that?
Well, there's no doubt that, I share your concern as a parent, as a citizen, and as a voter in every way. But I do believe that satire and comedy is important to help support democracy, to help fight for the truth. I mean, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert, to Bill Maher and John Oliver, down to people like myself, John Fugelsang, Dean Obeidallah, who all have radio shows at SiriusXM, you try to point out the hypocrisy. You try to point out irony. You try to point out the ridiculousness of this boy King's behavior whenever you can, so that, frankly, the public and your viewers, your listeners, realize they're not going crazy all alone. They're not experiencing this in a vacuum. We're all living on the edge day to day. We're all experiencing this, and comedy often really is pointing to experiences that we share, that we have, things that we've all heard other people say. Anybody has slipped on the ice before. So you can make a joke about even a tragedy as long as it's a good joke. And oftentimes through comedy, I think we get to truth from Mark Twain to George Carlin right down to me, Rick.
Yeah, well, look, we need the next George Carlin. But here's the thing. I mean, everyone, I think, looks at Donald Trump and says he's a buffoon, he's an idiot, he's all of those things. The funny is kind of worn off.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt that it's sometimes harder to make the joke, to make it funny, because it gets old and it gets scary and it gets repetitive. And that's the hard part, I think, for a lot of satirists, for comedians, for writers, to ridicule this guy in a way that hasn't already been done, or to even, should we even have to, because he's such a walking joke himself. I mean, his tweets are so poorly written and filled with misspellings and errors, and I mean, everything he does and says is just filled with stupidity and ignorance and just his braggadocio. It's all so pathetic and it's all so exaggerated. It seems almost not necessary to be hyperbolic about it or to point out the irony or the hypocrisy, which sometimes breeds the comedy. But we still keep trying to do it, and people like Sam B on her show and so many others. This new, Showtime, produced by Stephen Colbert, has a new cartoon president that actually looks really, really good. So I think there's still plenty of meat on the bone to try to get to the truth through comedy.
Is there hope? I mean, look, you see all of the attacks on our institutions, the fake media, who's the enemy of the people. You see all of these attacks on the FBI, Justice Department. You go down the list. Is there hope?
Yes, there has to be hope. James Baldwin said, as long as we're alive, we have to be optimists. There has to be hope. And there are, I think the hope really is manifesting in this 21st century civil rights movement, this reckoning, the Me Too movement. We've got over 500 women running for different offices all over the country. You've got a record number of congressmen also resigning, especially Republicans. We heard this week that Trey Gowdy is stepping down, and that's a pretty big deal. He's been a very effective conspiracy theorist. He led many of the Benghazi witch hunt, and he's continued to be less than above board, I think it's fair to say. And the rumor is about Trey Gowdy is that he's actually decided to step down because he's transitioning, Rick, into full vampire. There are some rumors that he's joining the Slytherin house at Hogwarts. So still, those are rumors, but those are sources close to Trey Gowdy that saying that he's in the final phase of turning into a vampire, and he'd like to focus on that for the rest of his time.
All right, you went vampire. I was thinking we were going a different direction with that. All right, vampire, sure, why not? Look, as long as he's gone. What I said when I saw it is good. Bye. Yeah,
well, vampires never die. I don't know if you knew that, Rick.
I did. So let me ask you last kind of line of questioning on this, because when you look at that speech, was there anything that you saw that you, as a citizen, as a comedian, anything you saw in this that was worthwhile? Anything you go, hey, there's something we can build on, or was it all just? Hey,
no, it's so easy to say no, because this guy, more than anything else, is inconsistent and unprincipled. So if he rolled out an idea or a red line on a negotiation, we know that he wouldn't hold himself to it. He doesn't forget about that he agreed with Chuck and Nancy on something for immigration a while back, or to keep the government open, or whatever it was. Forget about that he had that temporary agreement and broke it later, because that was with Democrats, and maybe somehow that's more acceptable when he heard from his supporters or Republicans or the people who are bossing him around in the White House. I don't know. But the fact is, he also disagreed a number of times on immigration, on the FISA renewal, with his own White House and Republican leadership. He disagreed with them because he doesn't know what side of any issue he's on. So going back to the State of the Union, it doesn't matter what ideas that he has, because the question that everybody has every right to ask, because he has no credibility left anymore, is, if that's an idea that he had on Tuesday night, will he still have it on Wednesday night? If he supported something on Thursday, will he support it Thursday night? And that's a question that not only his haters like me and many of your viewers, I would imagine, are asking. It's a question that his chief of staff is asking. His secretary of defense is asking. Anybody interviewing for any job is asking. He says this today. Tomorrow, is he going to change his mind? Is he going to take back the word that he gave me? He has no credibility. So whether you're a foreign world leader, the head of an intelligence agency, or the leadership of the Democratic Party, it doesn't matter what he says, because it can't be trusted. And that's probably the scariest thing about this guy.
Yeah, and another reason I think he has to go, it's very soon. I'm hoping for very soon.
Yeah, I don't see him going anywhere very soon, no matter what happens with the Mueller investigation, because whatever Robert Mueller concludes, his investigation, his reputation has sadly been destroyed by Republicans who are, for whatever reason, beholden to the president, and the right-wing media, which, of course, at this point, is so despicable that it's nothing but sad. Who knows what happens with this investigation? But the one thing we know that we can do is, God forbid he's going to last 4 years in this office, we can check him by taking over the House of Representatives. We need to take back the House. It'd be great to take back the Senate. If we did that, we could lock up every other Supreme Court vacancy and get him back for what he did to America and the Obama administration, with Mitch McConnell's help. So we got to take back the House. It'd be nice for President Obama if we woke up tomorrow and President Trump would be gone. But what would that mean anyway? President Mike Pence? So we've got to take back the House. And every American, I think, has to do something every day to try to support their local district and whoever is running to take back the House of Representatives, to provide a check on this man.
There you go. Good stuff, Pete. I appreciate the time. Good talking to you again.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be on the Rick Smith Show. You know, I look up to you a great deal. Thanks for having me, Rick.
Thanks so much, Pete. Pete Dominick, comedian, also host of Sirius XM Stand Up with Pete. Now, again, as he pointed out, not a big fan of the Donald, but you got to vote. You got to get out there. You got to vote come November. Good stuff. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. I love Pete. Good guy. And fantastic comedian. Just a good guy. But look, you know, as we were saying, the reality is the speech, really boring. It was probably being one of the longer speeches in State of the Union address history, much, long, right there with the Bill Clinton speeches. It kind of makes you go, why? Why did we put ourselves through that? Look, Bill Clinton was an amazing orator. He was somebody that you can listen to. He was a good used car salesman too. This guy, not so much, even though he claims to be Mr. Art of the Deal. You got to wonder, the whole art of the lie thing. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Tell us what you think. Was the speech all that it was cracked up to be? Was it earth-moving? Is there anything that you see coming out of it on anything, on immigration, on infrastructure, on trade policies, on manufacturing, on education, on moving this country forward? I'd love to hear it, because I didn't see it. I wanted it. I wanted to see it. It wasn't there. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Tell us what you think. We'd love to share it on air. The more I go back to this, and look, like I said, I fell asleep halfway through. The more I go back to this, the more I'm truly concerned for the future of this country. And as the Mueller investigation squeezes in, you have to wonder what's next. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day striking auto workers in Cleveland, Ohio, defended their picket lines in what is known as the Battle of East 140th Street. Members of UAW Local 45 at GM's Fisher Body Plant had been on strike for 3 weeks. They had joined striking GM workers at 12 plants throughout Michigan. They demanded a supplemental agreement granting skilled workers wage increases, overtime adjustments and seniority, and apprentice provisions. In Cleveland, strikers vowed to stop the scabbing and were mostly successful. Now, at the start of the morning shift, a scab attempted to plow through the picket lines at a high rate of speed. Strikers flooded the gates and brought the scab car to a virtual stop. As they attempted to convince him not to cross through, mounted police viciously charged and attacked the strikers. Police continued to shoot tear gas guns from behind plant gates. Soon, there were more than 5,000 picketers fighting with police as workers poured out from half a dozen nearby plants to support the strikers. For over 2 hours, workers showered strike-breaking forces with bricks, rocks, and paving blocks. They overturned scab cars and drove the police off the street and into the plant. Fighting broke out again in the afternoon when police tried to bring in more tear gas supplies. Strike leaders directed activities from an amplifier on the roof of a nearby restaurant. The next day, famed Prohibition crusader Elliot Ness, now Cleveland's director of public safety, enforced a 500-yard riot zone, banning all gatherings near the gates and limited picketers to 7 at each gate. Strikers began picketing the homes of known scabs and would ratify a new contract just days later. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. This hour, we're going to look back at the AFL-CIO's convention in St. Louis. The last couple of weeks, we've been having interviews and talking about issues from St. Louis. This week, there were a couple that I wanted to make sure that we got on, especially the one about automation and the future. Another one about, our relations with other countries. So much of what come out of this convention, so much of what we saw during our time in St. Louis gives me hope that maybe there is future for workers. Maybe there's a possibility to fight for better wages, hours, conditions, all of that. Now, look, the attacks that are coming are real, and we understand that. At the end of the day, though, it's going to come down to working people standing up and saying enough is enough already. And I think that's what I took from the convention as a whole, that this was a moment in time where the leaders were saying, look, we're in trouble. We need to make sure that there's opportunity for working people, that politicians start holding up their end of the deal. And that's one of the things that I think that came out of the convention that was, that was noteworthy. That they were saying, look, we're no longer going to be the Democratic Party's piggy bank. You're going to actually have to, actually stand up for working people. And that's refreshing. It's something that's been needed for a very long time. And it's a message to Republicans saying, look, you want the endorsement of working people? Come back to being worker friendly. Lose some of these policies that have been destructive and divisive and have destroyed the working class of this country. So it's going to be interesting to see where all of this plays out. And over the next hour, what we're going to talk about is, automation. The future is now. What is that going to look like? Also going to talk about, the battles in blue states like Massachusetts. We're going to talk about the assaults on veterans in the VA. Lots and lots of things to get to. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Share some of your opinions, some of your thoughts on this. But we're gonna spend a couple of minutes and look back at our time at the AFL's convention. Quick break. Right back with Ed Whitkin, former president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. Right back. I'm sitting here with Ed Whitkin, former president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, now out into the world by himself, and just gave probably one of the best talks on automation that I have heard. For a long time, we've been talking about the doom and gloom, the job loss. Half of all the jobs in 20 years they predict will be gone. What does that mean for us workers? Here to answer some of that, I've asked Ed Whitkin to come sit with us. Ed, thanks for taking time for us.
Not at all.
So we see these studies, we see these reports. Half of all the jobs being done today are going to be gone in 20 years.
Well, it depends what study you believe, but some say as many as half. There's other studies that show 10, 15%. What we do know is at least 4 million drivers' jobs are at risk. And that
my profession's done.
There's a lot of multiplier effects that haven't really been studied. So if you think about it, not only are driver jobs at risk, but the way the new transportation systems are coming online, they also need a lot less mechanical support. So sort of the old idea that you have all these garages with a bunch of mechanics, I think that's also not disappearing, but I think the type of support that those systems will need will be very different. If you look at some of the prototype videos of the stuff coming in 5-10 years, what I always find startling about it is that a lot of it is humanless. You just don't see a lot of people.
You said something that really caught my attention, in that the economy's growing. It's just growing without us, without labor, without workers. And the question is in the future, as to maybe not be so afraid of automation, how do we share in that growth? How do we share in that wealth that will be created?
Well, that's a great question, Rick, because I think what we have to do is stop just agonizing about change. There are plenty of labor leaders, I'm sure, sitting around in the late 20th century agonizing about the computer and this alleged internet that was, about to take hold, and it all took hold. And we're still standing as a country, but we have to do really three things. One, we have to restore the idea that we have a compact in this country between working people and unions.
Right.
What the disruptors have done, and I use that term loosely, which is the big tech companies and some of the other sort of venture capitalists, is they've kind of gotten in the middle of that compact. They've become the middleman between union and worker, and they've made too many workers in this generation believe that unions are a thing of the past.
Right, I hear it all the time.
And that's why we have so much income inequality. It's why we have flat wages. It's why people are making today in some professions what they were making 10, 15 years ago. That's the reason, because unions have declined.
Yeah, I would argue in my profession 30 years ago.
Right.
We can go into that, but the thing is another thing you said, that the models of the future, the businesses of the future, are built on being vehemently anti-union, and also not having really full-time employees, doing a lot of gig economy, a lot of contract work. That seems to be the future. Is there a place for the labor movement in that world?
No question. So we spend too much time worrying about the on-demand economy or the gig economy. It's here to stay. What we have to worry about is on-demand labor and how we give on-demand labor a voice. So the answer to your question is, I don't think we have that sort of magic bullet.
Right.
But what we do know is that those workers need a voice just like anybody else. Whether or not they're in an atypical work arrangement, whether or not an official employee in a normal employer-employee relationship, should be immaterial to our desire to give those workers a voice and give them a reason to want to be in a union. We have to sort of think about this as a value proposition.
Right.
What is the value that a union brings to you, whether you're in a traditional employee setting or whether you're in a gig economy setting where you're an on-demand labor person who might have 3 or 4 clients that tell you when they need help. Any one of those kinds of employees, they need a union.
Right.
Because these employers aren't going to give the money away for free.
Right. So the value proposition 30 years ago when I started was better wages, better hours, better conditions. Has that changed?
No, but we have to get from here to there. And if we can't get to those employees because of, for example, atypical work arrangements, we have to come up with new structures that are focused on making workers feel like they're incomplete, like they're economically weak, or feel like almost hollowed out by not having a voice on the job. It is really what gave rise to unions in the first place. The passion that led to the creation of the labor movement were because people were literally being treated like garbage.
Right.
They were being paid pennies on the dollar. They were literally dying on the job without safety protections. And so the needs of those workers really is what drove the growth and the creation and then the growth of the labor movement. We have to recreate that need.
So what you're talking about then is people were in mass desperation. Do we have to go back to that mass desperation?
Well, I would argue that when you've got the amount of income equality that we have now, when you have the amount of sort of distribution of wealth issues that we have in this country, that we're there now. We have too many people living in desolation. We have too many people that can't afford their rent the next month. They don't know if they're even going to have enough money in the bank to pay their rent the next month. I think we're there. What we don't have is we haven't recreated the compact that led to the creation of the labor movement in the first place. The compact between worker and union that doesn't let all these disruptors get out of the way. Right to work, independent contractors, gig economy. That's the other thing. They come up with these sort of really cool, hip-sounding terms. And I always tell people, they may be cool and hip-sounding terms, but there's nothing cool or hip about having a lousy wage with no benefits.
Yeah, there's nothing good about poverty. Now, you had said something that during your talk that said the U.S. is third worst. We're the third from the bottom. Mm-hmm. However you're going to put that in labor laws, labor protections. Explain that.
Sort of labor market policy. If you think about sort of the world policy regime, there's countries that pride themselves in having really strong job matching programs, upskilling jobs, laddering people up to the next job, giving people a softer landing by telling them that, yes, it looks like this technology may be a disruptor that takes your job, but we're going to work with you to replace you. We rank third to last in the world in those kinds of policies. And so that means if you're a worker in Sweden or a worker in Germany, you stand a much better chance of landing on your feet than you do here in America, which is sort of a hard thing to believe, the so-called beacon of hope. It's not quite the beacon of hope it used to be.
This is you're on your own economy. You're an individual. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps place. When we kick you off the wagon, pull yourself back up.
It is, except I heard, if you listen to the talk that Bill Spriggs likes to give, he's the chief economist for the AFL-CIO, who's probably been on your show before and should be on it again. He tells a great story about the concentration of wealth in the world. And so what's really happened, in sort of basic English, is a handful of very powerful interests have divvied up just about all the money.
Yep.
And the only equalizer left in the country, in the world, in my opinion, are strong independent unions. That I don't want to sound like it's about redistribution of wealth. That's not what I'm talking about. It's about giving workers a chance to share in the bounty that they create with their own productivity in their work.
See, I'm not afraid of
unions used to be around.
Certainly, I'm not afraid of the redistribution of wealth because it's been redistributed away from us.
Good point.
I mean, give me the 1950s tax code. Give me the 1950s, labor movement of a 35% union density, one income supporting a family. I mean, give me some of that. That middle class that could thrive and was the most prosperous in
let's
history.
Look at that era. That era was the height of the compact that I like to talk about between worker and union.
Right. That
was the height of it. When you had 1 out of 3 workers in a union, which meant that in almost every major family in the country, you had several union members in that family. We're now the generation of people who are a generation removed from a time when they could sit at the kitchen table, at Thanksgiving and be at a table with union members or union retirees or whatever. And that's on us. I said this at a conference on Saturday morning. We will not find salvation in our politics. We will not find salvation in a political party or the other. We'll find salvation in the global labor movement, because it is the labor movement that created the middle class, and now it's disappearing. It's going to be the labor movement that recreates it.
Yeah, so let me ask you then, at what point do we say the New Deal era, that compact, the labor peace that came out of the New Deal, when do we say that's dead and we move forward?
Whether it's dead or not, what we have to do is create the inspiration that created the energy that ultimately created mass organizing, nationwide, that created the modern union that is now seeing major membership decline. If you look at the numbers, just the numbers alone, the labor movement's numbers have remained relatively stable over the last 30 years, but the economy hasn't.
Right.
So on a chart, The membership's flat, the economy grows. Well, that means the crack spread between the membership and the value of the overall economy continues to grow. So we have to now move that line. That trajectory has to change to give more workers a chance to share in.
Yeah.
in
I would argue some of that does come back to politics and policy, given the environment we're in. I do want to go back to the talk on automation, though, because, a lot of people are scared to death. And you had said that, agonizing is not strategy. How do we take that 55-year-old truck driver who we're not going to retrain to be a brain surgeon? How do we get him to the end? How do we get him to retirement? How do we get him to be able to take care of himself and his family when we know he's not going to go back to that community college and get a $60,000 a year job?
Well, let's go back to your original premise of a minute ago, which is, of course, politics and policy matter a lot. There's probably 2 or 3 ways that we're going to do that. One, the people that stand to make the most amount of money out of this mass wave of automation should be required to participate in finding solutions for the workers who are most at risk. They're not going to like the sound of that because they never like to pay more money than they have to.
Right.
But we're going to have to figure out a way to get, at a minimum, big tech to come up with a way for them to participate in helping that 55-year-old transportation worker who stands to lose a job. So that's point one. Point two, we have to go from third to last in the world to the upper tier in the world in labor market policies that are designed to do 3 things. Give people opportunity to be more mobile and to follow good work so that they can get into good jobs when their jobs are at risk. 2, we have to have programs that are designed to actually ladder people up so that they're not stuck in jobs that we know in 5 or 10 years could disappear. So as opposed to waiting for them to disappear, let's start laddering them up now. And 3, we have to get back to a point where our labor laws are not designed to stop unionization. Let's actually design our labor laws so that you can organize workers. And as Rich Trumka has been saying for months, and we'll say it here at this convention more than once, we have to have a bargaining for all policy in this country. That's where your politics comment comes in, which is we're going to have a massive sort of reconfiguration of our political alignments right now, because right now they're stacked against working people.
Yeah, I've always said you vote your job. Last question I've got for you, in looking at the future of this, because it's scary times. On one hand, because we're going to have massive economic chaos one way or another, but it's really kind of exciting times on the other hand, because, it's the future.
It is the future,
and it's
Rick,
here now.
And it's here now, and nobody with a straight face can look at you on your show or anywhere else and say that there isn't any growth of job opportunities in the U.S. economy. There's plenty of growth opportunities in the job markets. What we have to find is an opportunity for union job growth. Why? Not just because it's good to grow the labor movement just for the sake of growing the labor movement, but because we've learned that the greatest war on poverty that America ever had was the growth of unions, right? And so if you want to eradicate poverty or at least eliminate a lot of it, if you want to make our wages grow with the economy, if you want to stop the growth of these massive organic companies that are growing up completely non-union, we're going to have a fix. And that's where our politics come in. We have to fix our labor laws and make them about helping workers, not making it harder on workers.
Good stuff. Ed, I appreciate the time.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much. Great talking with you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Are you afraid of the future that's coming? The potential of losing half of all jobs? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Love to hear your thoughts. Right back. I'm sitting here with J. David Cox. He's the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be here, Rick. Always glad to.
What do you think of this event?
The convention's been one of the best ones I've ever been to. A lot of discussion, a lot of debate, delegates really upbeat, and I'm really glad it's been the internal focus of what we need to be about as a movement.
Yeah,
so I'm very proud of that.
One of the things that I've been to a number of conventions over the years, and we've brought our show to numerous conventions, and there's always a lot of politicians and a lot of politicos. None here.
None at all this time. We are talking about what we need to be doing as a movement. Just a few minutes ago, we were debating about hate that we see in the United States of America right now, and discrimination, and how it's sort of being okay to hate people and discriminate against them just because they don't look like we look or talk like we talk, or maybe of not of the same religion, or no religion. that's just wrong. We're American citizens. We were established as a country of a lot of freedoms. So been focusing on that and the other issues. It's been great.
Now, you grew up in North Carolina, right?
Yes, I did.
And you know, you think of North Carolina, you go back, we did a civil rights tour through North Carolina, South Carolina, through much of the South. You know, I'm sure when you were younger, you know, we had a lot of racial tensions.
Clearly.
Is it disheartening, angering, scary that it seems like we're almost back to those moments?
It's frightening to me. It's frightening. Yes, North Carolina. I grew up in the 50s and in the 60s, and I would say North Carolina was a little more progressive than some other states in the South. Terry Sanford was elected governor in 1960, while other Southern Democratic governors were not making the moves to integrate schools. Terry Sanford started that process and was moving more aggressively with it. But now I'm seeing, the hatred, the racism. I'm a strong activist with Reverend Barber and the Moral Monday movement and the moral movement period that he's leading all over this country that I enjoy very much and I want to be active and a part of. But yeah, I'm seeing things change.
Yeah, it's amazing. We're living in very interesting times. And you know, I'm thinking about the fact that there are no politicos here. Is this a signal that the labor movement is maybe pulling back a little bit from politics, maybe sending a message to Democrats, maybe even sending a message to Republicans? Because look, I remember, and I'm not that old, I don't think, but I remember when there were pro-labor Republicans, when labor wasn't a partisan issue where we were beating each other up over. We all want good wages, good conditions, good jobs.
I think we are sending a message that we are for pro-worker politicians. Doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or an independent. Are you a pro-worker politician? Do you believe in collective bargaining? The best way to raise wages in this country is to have a contract and collective bargaining. The best way to have rights in the workplace is through having a union. All of those will help the economy, that will help raise wages. It's not just raising the minimum wage that will deal with wages. The best way to have improved wages is by collective bargaining.
Let me ask you, the one thing that we see this convention is it's been lingering in the air. The Supreme Court case is coming up, Janus versus AFSCME.
Yes.
There are people who are looking at it's Armageddon next year when this case goes through, and ultimately I believe is going to be decided the wrong way with Neil Gorsuch as the stolen seat. Your union, the federal government's employees union, you're already in this world. I mean, you don't have fair share. You have to go out and re-up members every year, right?
We organize every day of our lives, 365 days a year in AFGE. We're recruiting, asking people to join our union. We don't have the fair share. We should have it, but we don't have it. But this decision, it will affect the entire labor movement. AFGE has as much invested in this Supreme Court decision as AFSCME, as American Federation of Teachers, of all the unions. This is an attack upon the labor movement, and so an injury to one is an injury to all. And yeah, we've lived in an open shop world, but at the same token, when you come and attack our brothers and sisters, you are attacking AFGE, and we're going to be standing in solidarity. But I am not afraid of open shops, because people want to have a union. People want a voice in the workplace, and the only way they get that is through having a union. An employer is just not going to automatically love you that good and take that great a care of you. I don't care if it's the federal government, if it's a mom and pop shop, whoever it is, city government, the school system, transit company. If you got a boss, you need a union. That's just the way I feel about it.
It's a simple, I mean, it's almost something we could put on a bumper sticker.
That's right. Clearly, we ought to have it on a bumper sticker. But if you've got a boss, you need a union. The only way we are going to have increased wages, increased worker rights in this country, and everyone, a thriving middle class and working class. And I use the term working class a lot more than I use the middle class anymore, because I believe we're about working people. And the only way we're going to get there is through having a union and the labor movement. And it's not always going to be the traditional arrangements that we've seen in the past. We proved that with TSA, who didn't have collective bargaining. But yeah, we went out, asked them to be a part of our union, worked in that, got them collective bargaining 10 years after the fact. But at the same token, they didn't have it by law, but that didn't scare us off. They still wanted to form and join a union without the typical union structure.
And I've heard you talk about this in the past, where we brought back and we took over the screening and all. And look, everybody, honestly, nobody's thrilled with TSA and the screening and all that, but it's not their fault. It's the policy. But you've talked about how they were brought in, they had no rights, they were making far less than anybody else in government, and they worse benefits, and really the redheaded stepchild, if I remember the
yeah,
exact
I've used
quote.
that term frequently. It's a Southern term,
Right?
probably.
No, it's all over. But you took those members, you got them together, and together they were able to fight for better wages, better hours, better conditions.
That's right, and I mean, we've got better working conditions. Everything's not perfect yet, but we continue to make improvements through our legislative collective effort, because we have to bargain with Congress for wages and benefits. We don't get to go sit at the bargaining table and do that. We certainly have been able to work to try to improve their wages and other benefits of employment. And if you remember back a little over a year ago, we were expecting these long TSA lines. It was our members that devised various ways and methods and means and stepped up to the plate and said, look, the workers know how to get this work done, and those lines didn't materialize. And the one thing that I take great pride in, not from me, not just from AFGE, but from our members, since 9/11, and government now does what government should have always been doing. We have not had any incidents of terrorism, hijacking, or things that create havoc with the American people. And it's because of AFG members that we are all flying safely in our country and around the world.
Yeah, good on them. Last question I've got for you, last line, because I have to ask about it. The attack on the VA. We know that there's a movement in this country that wants to privatize, wants to use what I would argue is a created crisis. I understand there's some 40,000 plus vacancies in the VA. So all of these complaints that I see from people, it appears to me that this is a created crisis. And I'm curious your view on it.
A completely created crisis. And these numbers are the Secretary, Dr. David Shulkin's numbers, not my numbers. He has used from 41 to 45 to 49,000 vacancies. And get this clearly understood, this is vacancies. The Congress of the United States has wrote the check, put the money into the VA's bank account. There's no further need for appropriations. The money's there, and said, go hire. What employer in this country that had the ability to go hire 45,000 new workers with money in the bank wouldn't want to do that?
Absolutely.
I mean, so I keep saying, Mr. Secretary, why are you not filling those vacancies? And I do understand perhaps finding a neurosurgeon in Cheyenne, Wyoming may be a little difficult. But we're talking about a healthcare system that is from coast to coast, border to border, and yes, is in Hawaii and in Puerto Rico. And it's not just doctors and nurses. There's nursing assistants, there's the support people, there's many professionals that have to come with certain unique skills, but then there are many people that's on the job training, the administrative folks. Somebody has to maintain the environment, somebody has to maintain the physical plant of the VA Medical Center. You've got to have the HR people to recruit, to process these folks. So it's not just 45,000 vacancies of doctors and nurses. It's all of that structure that supports hiring doctors and nurses as well as others. He's got the money in the bank. He needs to hire those people. He needs to be given Congress a weekly or no less than monthly update, as Congressman Anthony Brown has proposed, how many vacancies, what he's doing to fill them. And the one thing I would say today, AFGE appeals to the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs. We want to help him to recruit and retain those employees. I was recruited by another VA nurse. I've recruited other nurses to go to work at the VA. We're identifying the problem. We want to help him and work in great partnership with him to fix that problem. Mr. Secretary, AFGE is ready to help you to recruit those people to come work and care for the men and women that have borne the battle for this country.
Yeah, if he's not going to do it, you will.
We'll be glad to.
But
That's
maybe,
right.
maybe
He's got the money. We'll do anything in our power to get people to come to work and tell them, number one, it's a great place to work, and it's the most noble mission in the world.
Yeah, maybe we should tell him not so much on the 10-day river cruise down the Thames with your wife and your staff. Maybe come back and do your job.
That's exactly
kind of a
right.
thought.
Let's get focused on, hey, out there every day. I'm ready to go to any VA medical center with him to talk about what can we do to get staff through the door from growing our own, not just the short-term plan, but a long-range plan, but not to increase contracting out and privatization. Veterans don't want that. The VFW recently did a survey. 92% of every veteran in this country says, I want my care at the VA by VA employees.
Good stuff. J. David Cox, I appreciate the time.
Thank
Great
you
talking
so
with you.
much.
Always great.
Always great to be
True
with you.
advocate and champion for our veterans. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or shoot us a line here at Twitter. Right back. Sitting here with Massachusetts AFL-CIO President Stephen A. Tolman. Stephen, thanks for taking time for us.
You kidding me? It's great to be here with you, Rick.
What do you think of this event?
I think this has been a real good event. It's about labor. It's about showing all of the different affiliates here that we are one, and that our enemies are one. We have the same enemies. You might think it's this one or that one. And there's a lot of people that want to destroy the labor movement. They want to take rights away from workers all the time. They want to make healthcare a second mortgage, and they don't want us to have pensions.
No,
So, you know, we're under attack. I mean, I see it as well, you know, Rick, what I really see here is that the leaders of our unions are really coming together and realizing that, you know what, it's got to be a united effort, all of us working together. I'm more optimistic now that we'll have one labor movement and not have a divisive labor movement, because the issues are too important.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, and I've been asking this question for a while, because we've seen these attacks on the labor movement for a generation now. You go back to the shot heard across the boardroom when Reagan fired the PATCO workers, and every one of those attacks on workers. At what point does the labor movement say that, you know, the New Deal era, industrial peace era is over? When is labor peace? When is that over and we become a militant movement again? Because look, as you pointed out, the war of labor and capital is always ongoing, and capital right now is winning. When does labor finally wake up that there's actually a war going on?
Well, I guess I think about that and I say, well, if that were going to be the case, do I want to publicize it? If we're going to go more militant, you know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know the answer to that, but let's just look at the litany of problems we face. Now, we have an America where somehow the pharmaceutical industry runs the whole industry. It's not the FDA, it's not the Department of Justice, as we just saw on 60 Minutes, so that they flood all these dangerously addictive drugs, which are ruining a whole generation of young kids with no accountability. And instead of trying to get them better and get them proper treatment, they want to treat them with more drugs because they think they save, you know, the cost of the overnight stays and all that stuff. We have a society that has fallen prey to an industry that is profiting on killing people. And these drugs are dangerously addictive. They are too powerful for the human brain, and somebody's got to let them know that. So that's in the pharmaceutical industry. That's in our medical infrastructure. How many, and people talk about the deaths, we have lost like 200,000 people, 3 times what we lost in Vietnam in just the last decade through this, and nobody is held accountable.
Right. So let me ask you the other side of this, because, you know, look, we've had when I was a kid growing up in the projects on the west side of Cleveland,
Yes.
we had heroin junkies who were dying all the time.
You did.
Nobody cared about that because they
Right.
were basically urban poor people of color generally.
Right.
Now that it's hit the white suburbs, it's now a crisis.
Well, it isn't so much that because, and I agree that's kind of always a counter to this. And I saw crack in particular in the late 80s, early 90s really adversely affect Black America. I mean, it was the worst thing I ever saw. And I saw some guys I worked with who were super people, and one night they went out and then they were in trouble. And what did we do? What did Congress do? They increased the penalties.
Let's lock them up.
So I get that. They did that. In this particular case, it's a touch different because that was crack coming from the street corner drug dealers. This is orchestrated by corporate America.
Right.
And there's a significant difference. In this, you had an industry where they come out and they hired ex-cheerleaders, beautiful women to go into the doctor's office and to tell them that there's nothing wrong, this is not addictive, so that they deceived not just white America, but all of America. And yes, it is in all the white communities. And yes, it has taken a hard toll on white America. Maybe it took that to wake up and figure out how do we address our drug epidemic, because currently now we know that some of those laws that were put into place need to be repealed. People know that. But once again, if you look of where Congress was, Congress, with the 60 Minutes program, what did they do? The fact that they gutted the Department of Justice, who was going after the 3 major companies that were distributing these drugs, and they went into one county in Virginia of a population of under 400, and in 2 years they gave 9 million pills to that area. So when I say, like, is this just an attack on workers, an attack on middle class? It's when are the middle class going to revolt to take back what is really our nation?
Yep.
Because I used to believe that our nation, our Congress, was looking out for us. But by these actions, what the actions that I saw on 60 Minutes last Sunday night, in my opinion, are tantamount to treason, because they have totally neglected any accountability to what America should be. That's just one example.
Right.
And then you look at what they're doing. Defined benefits, literally, defined pension benefits are going the way of a dinosaur.
They're not already? Did I miss that?
Well, it's way down.
And then you just see the other day that Congress now wants to lower the contribution amount from $18,000 down to $2,400 for 401ks. So not only did they steal and break and destroy defined benefits, they now want to screw up the defined contribution that they told my generation was going to make us all millionaires.
And by the way, that 401k, that was supposed to be a supplement to the defined benefit pensions. It's almost like charter schools. Charter schools, and whatever anyone says, there may be a good charter school because teachers who teach are always good, so you can't say that there's no credibility in the concept. But in Massachusetts, the concept was to create laboratories of innovation and then to take what worked and to make our public schools better.
Share that best practice. And the thing that bothers me with this is our tax dollars design these best practices, which they turned around, patented, and are now selling back to us. So we paid not only for the research and development of these things, now we got to pay for the ongoing use of them, of the things that work, and the very few things that work that have come out of it.
And there hasn't been anything really brought back, very, very little. But what it's done, it's almost created a 2-tier system of public education. One private, where there's people benefiting and profiting on schools.
And they're not the kids.
No, they're not. They're all run by CEOs. The administrators are big paying jobs, but the teachers have no benefits, no defined benefit pension plan. They get health care maybe, but no accountability. And it's really frustrating. So they're trying to tear down the whole infrastructure where organized labor has set a standard with the ability to collectively bargain for issues and with the ability to stand up against injustice without the fear of reprisal. And these are the things that we're seeing constantly. Corporate America is doing this and think they're benefiting, when in reality, it's organized labor. The people who I'm with down here in St. Louis, it's organized labor that are standing up against injustice, that are challenged the system in the inappropriate way they're trying to prohibit people from voting, the inappropriate way that they're treating America's middle class. And we got to do something about it. And I think that's what this convention has done. It's pointed out with integrity how important it is that we understand each other's problems and we work together to make sure that we're standing up against these crazy ideas. And I brought up the opiate epidemic because I understand how bad it is, and I've seen the heartache. But I only saw it in Massachusetts, but it is everywhere.
It's everywhere. So to me, part of the opioid epidemic problem is not getting people hooked on it in the first place.
Right.
And I often go back to, the best part of that is giving people hope, a good job, the ability to have the thought that they have a future. I mean, I look at myself coming out of the projects. It was a good paying union job that now my kids will never see what I saw growing up.
No, they won't. No,
and
they
it comes
won't.
back to that job. And I emphasize not just a job, but a good paying union job. And I come from someone who, look, I spent 20 years driving a truck. That job was a good paying job.
But you loved it every day. I could tell
did.
by your personality. You loved it every day.
But I could have been doing it for a non-union company making half the money.
Right.
It's because I had that union card that I was well compensated.
You had integrity and you had ability and accountability. If you had a problem, you knew how to address it.
Absolutely. And that, I think, giving the people that kind of empowerment, maybe they don't turn to drugs then.
Well, I don't think that the difference is that these young people have been prescribed this medication and they think it's legit because it's prescribed, but it changes the brain. And that's the part that the pharmaceutical industry didn't tell people. It changes the brain and they have no control over it because it isn't legitimate. It's not good stuff. It is much too powerful for our human brain, and that's the problem. And then when the doctors say, oh no, I can't give you anymore, they've developed a habit so that they get very sick without it, and one thing leads to another. And that's the deception that I see in the pharmaceutical industry, that they, first of all, as I said, they hire cheerleaders that go out and say it's not addictive. And then I'm seeing the profiteers like Purdue Pharma that they're now using, they're a billion, first of all, this was just a shell of a company that is now a $15 billion company. And let me tell you that now they're using their profits to try to attack the rights of workers in many states. We had a ballot initiative on charter schools in Massachusetts, and I'm told that the president of that company gave $2 million to support charter schools, which is really about union busting. It's about taking away the right to collectively bargain for what you believe in. It's supporting that concept. Yeah, so maybe it tells me we could organize the pharmaceutical industry. Maybe that's where we're going to get at.
There's a good start. We had a state senator who ran for governor a couple years back that the charter school industry gave him $4 million to run a losing campaign. I do want to change gears back to back to the convention and the hopes coming out of this, because look, I've been calling what's going on in this country the No Rights at Work agenda for a very long time. The attacks on workers' rights to organize, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance, safety, wages, all of this stuff. Everywhere we see these attacks coming, Massachusetts is the blue of the blue, the liberal state, the pro-worker state, supposedly. Are you seeing the same kind of things you're seeing coming out of Wisconsin, Ohio, and eventually Pennsylvania?
And Rick, what you point out about the unemployment insurance, once again, a safety net for the middle class. Now, we have the best benefits in the nation currently, and they point that out often at times because instead of just 26 weeks, we have the additional 4 weeks. And they think that that's a big deal. And the reason we have that is because, frankly, it's a very high cost of living. Right. And frankly, if you can't find a job, there's nothing wrong with helping people when they're down and out. However, the big push that they're saying, no new taxes. I never understood why Republicans, those people who have all the money, didn't want to increase taxes. But now I realize that the reason they don't want to have a decent amount of money in taxes is because then you can't pay pensions. Then you can't pay a decent health care, so that the cost gets shifted onto the very employees in public service who, when you knew in Massachusetts it was a concept that if you went to a public service job, you'll never be a millionaire, but you worked hard, but you got your pension and you got health care, and you'd retire with dignity. But now they've even attacked that, and they attacked that by not enough public money to be able to pay that. And in many states, they actually blame police and fire and say that they have these great pensions and that we have to take that and diminish that because we can't afford it. But the facts remain. We've forgot the mission of public good. And public good should be that we invest appropriately in public good issues, and so that we shouldn't be struggling. I don't mind paying taxes. I'm happy to pay taxes, especially when it means a solid infrastructure that I was given when I was growing up. We had a transportation system that worked. We had public schools that worked. We were building schools. We had an infrastructure where you could become successful by a good education, and all of that is crumbling apart, and they constantly say no new taxes and think that's the way to go. That's not the way to go. That collectively we should be proud to pay our taxes because we have accountability and we make sure that the infrastructure is in place for the next generation so they're not running on a dilapidated transportation system, one that works.
I'm with you, Stephen. It was great talking with you.
It's
I
great to
appreciate
be
the
here.
time. I got to talk to you again soon.
Well, listen, I keep up the work because you're doing some great work, Rick.
Good
Thank
stuff.
you.
Thank you so much. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break back here from the AFL-CIO's convention in St. Louis. This is The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day striking auto workers in Cleveland, Ohio, defended their picket lines in what is known as the Battle of East 140th Street. Members of UAW Local 45 at GM's Fisher Body Plant had been on strike for 3 weeks. They had joined striking GM workers at 12 plants throughout Michigan. They demanded a supplemental agreement granting skilled workers wage increases, overtime adjustments and seniority, and apprentice provisions. In Cleveland, strikers vowed to stop the scabbing and were mostly successful. Now, at the start of the morning shift, a scab attempted to plow through the picket lines at a high rate of speed. Strikers flooded the gates and brought the scab car to a virtual stop. As they attempted to convince him not to cross through, mounted police viciously charged and attacked the strikers. Police continued to shoot tear gas guns from behind plant gates. Soon, there were more than 5,000 picketers fighting with police as workers poured out from half a dozen nearby plants to support the strikers. For over 2 hours, workers showered strike-breaking forces with bricks, rocks, and paving blocks. They overturned scab cars and drove the police off the street and into the plant. Fighting broke out again in the afternoon when police tried to bring in more tear gas supplies. Strike leaders directed activities from an amplifier on the roof of a nearby restaurant. The next day, famed Prohibition crusader Elliot Ness, now Cleveland's director of public safety, enforced a 500-yard riot zone, banning all gatherings near the gates and limited picketers to 7 at each gate. Strikers began picketing the homes of known scabs and would ratify a new contract just days later. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. Just wrapped up here at the AFL an agreement, an update, a renewal of an agreement between the AFL-CIO and Mexican unions on working together, partnerships, talking about renegotiation of NAFTA, immigration reform, things that are going to help workers on both sides of the borders. And one of the stories that popped onto our radar is what's going on in the telecom industry down in Mexico. And that's why I turned to Francisco Hernandez. He's the head of the Juarez Telecom Union. Francisco, thanks for taking time for us.
The Mexican telecom. Entonces, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Okay. Gracias por llegar aquí para hablar con nosotros.
Gracias. Bueno, me da gusto estar aquí hoy en la convención de la AFL-CIO. Nos da además mucho gusto porque hemos firmado un convenio de solidaridad para luchar juntos contra la instalación de un muro que nos separa, para propiciar una reforma migratoria con respeto a los derechos humanos, para luchar porque los empleos se conserven en cada uno de los países donde se generan y sobre todo se mejore el salario de los trabajadores mexicanos, en fin, para desarrollar una serie de acciones que vayan a fortalecer nuestra relación con la AFL-CIO.
So it makes us very happy to be here at the AFL-CIO convention, where we've just very excited, especially because we just signed a new updated agreement with AFL-CIO and the UNT of Mexico, where we're going to work together even more and better on issues like being against the building of a border wall, and on agreements about getting salaries to go up on both sides of the border, and on things that are going to make life better for workers on both sides of the border.
How difficult is the current climate with our president and the rhetoric that you hear coming out of the White House in Mexico for workers there, and in relations to workers here in the U.S.?
Cuán difícil es ahora en México con la retórica tan dura que sale de la Casa Blanca en estos días para realmente trabajar en beneficio de los trabajadores mexicanos?
Es complicado porque se han endurecido las relaciones entre México y Estados Unidos por las políticas que se han implementado desde la Casa Blanca, pero nosotros entendemos que tenemos que impulsar el desarrollo de los trabajadores mexicanos, fortalecer los sindicatos y erradicar los contratos de protección a los patrones. Es difícil, pero creo que podemos lograrlo.
It certainly has become harder because the relations between Mexico and the United States have hardened. This is for sure, but it's also the case that we know we have to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do everything we can to the benefit of the workers on both sides of the border, and especially fight against something that's known as the protection contract. Is the kind of contract that actually protects companies from having a real union.
Now, we've got our billionaire leader here in this country. You in Mexico are fighting the wealthiest man in the world in the telecom industry. What's going on in Mexico with the telephone workers and Carlos Slim, the wealthiest man in the world?
Tenemos aquí ese líder millonario. Ustedes también en México tienen y ustedes mismos están en la lucha con tal vez el hombre más rico del mundo en un conflicto en el sector de telecomunicaciones. ¿Nos puede contar un poco lo que está pasando ahí?
Bueno, en México es el grupo privado más poderoso del país.
This is the most powerful private group in the country.
Se ha señalado por sus biógrafos que tienen como 1000 empresas de distinto nivel.
Various biographers say that he has around 1,000 companies of different sizes and sectors.
De esas 1000 empresas, el único sindicato que no tienen bajo su control es el nuestro.
And of those 1,000 companies, the only union that he doesn't have under his thumb and under his control is our union.
No le gustan los sindicatos, los combate y pues es una lucha difícil, pero hay que darla si queremos que el país mejore.
It's really difficult fight. It's a really hard struggle, but we have to carry on this fight, and it'll be best for the country if we keep doing what we're doing.
And how will the ties with the AFL-CIO help you in achieving that?
¿Cómo se van a ayudar los lazos y esa alianza con la AFL-CIO en esa lucha?
Bueno, nos ha ayudado mucho la exigencia del AFL-CIO para que en México mejoren los salarios. La presión del AFL-CIO nos sirvió para lograr una reforma laboral muy importante, de manera que sí nos ayuda mucho.
It's helped us a lot. It's helped the pressure of the AFL-CIO to raise wages in Mexico has been really important. It's helped us in all kinds of dealings with these companies. That labor reform in Mexico was also with the help of a lot of pressure from the AFL-CIO.
Last question I have for you, in looking at the fight that you have and your partnership with the AFL-CIO, we see wages in Mexico low and jobs moving from the U.S. to Mexico. Would rising wages in Mexico help maybe stem some of the tide of jobs to Mexico, and also while simultaneously making conditions better for workers in both countries?
Bueno, última pregunta es sobre esa posibilidad de realmente subir los salarios en México. Eso ayudaría obviamente al trabajador mexicano, pero ayudaría también en bajar la cantidad de empleos que van saliendo de Estados Unidos.
Para que en México mejoren los salarios de los trabajadores, para que los bajos salarios no sean una competencia inequitativa para los empleos en Estados Unidos, se necesita que haya libertad y democracia para los sindicatos. La mayoría de los sindicatos están controlados o por los empresarios o por el gobierno o por las mafias sindicales, y eso es nuestro principal obstáculo. Ahí es donde tenemos que poner.
In order to raise wages and have these positive effects that it would have, first, the most important thing is to have freedom and democracy for workers to have the real unions that they deserve. Unfortunately, most of the unions in Mexico, many unions in Mexico Mexico are totally controlled, sometimes by the company itself, sometimes by the government, sometimes by criminal kinds of organizations. And that's really the number one task to get to the wage increase that would be so good.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let me turn to Mario Gonzalez. He's the head of the pilots union in Mexico. Mario, how is this agreement, this renewal of an agreement, going to help you and your members?
Voy a contestar en español. Primero que nada, si me permite, pues agradecer la invitación a la convención y desearles que sigan teniendo mucho éxito en los trabajos. También agradecer todo el apoyo que hemos recibido por la AFL-CIO con el tema del sismo que recién tuvimos en México, el terremoto, el earthquake, y agradecer toda la solidaridad que manifestaron todos los trabajadores y los miembros de la AFL-CIO con nuestras organizaciones.
Thanks. I'd really like to start by thanking the AFL-CIO for the invitation to be here right now, and also thank you for all of the solidarity after the horrible earthquakes that struck in Mexico, all of the help, direct help from workers and from people in the United States.
Regresando a tu pregunta, si bien por una parte soy presidente del sindicato de los pilotos, pero en esta ocasión también representamos a todos los trabajadores agrupados en la Unión Nacional de Trabajadores de México, donde tenemos a los compañeros telefonistas, compañeros de las universidades, compañeros campesinos. Entonces realmente venimos en representación de todos los gremios.
And to get to your question, I'm here as the president of the pilots union, but in this occasion, we're here, Francisco and I, together as representatives of all Mexican workers. We have obviously the pilots, and also the telephone workers, but also some public sectors, some university workers, some agricultural workers, lots of different sectors of workers.
Given the divide between Mexico and the U.S. and the divide politically here in the U.S., how do you see our political culture and our political problems right now affecting what you're doing in Mexico, given your divides as well?
Sí, definitivamente tenemos una cultura diferente, que es lo que mencionaba Francisco. Tenemos que buscar estos acuerdos, que lo que estamos haciendo el día de hoy es ratificar un convenio que ya había sido firmado con anterioridad. Iniciamos los trabajos de colaboración en 1999, fue ratificado en el año 2010 y hoy lo estamos actualizando con todos los temas nuevos como el NAFTA, el muro que quieren poner, y es importante que conozcan aquí en Estados Unidos la manera de pensar y de sentir de los trabajadores mexicanos.
And I think we do have to recognize that, yes, there are differences between the countries, so a big part of our work is to strengthen the relationship between our organizations on both sides of the border. So we had this agreement for the first time in 1999, we renewed it and re-signed again in 2010, and we've updated it more and made it very relevant to what's going on right now, whether it's the border wall or the renegotiation of NAFTA or salaries. That's what we're here working on now, and that kind of strengthening of relationship answers part of your question about the differences between the two countries.
When your members hear our president talk about Mexico's going to pay for the wall, what kind of response do you usually get? Or is your former president the best authority on that?
No, pues básicamente es lo que hemos mencionado en estos días de trabajo, que estamos aquí precisamente para construir puentes, no, porque las barreras realmente lo único que hacen es dividirnos. Eso no sirve, eso no funciona. Y se quiere vender mucho la idea aquí en Estados Unidos de que los trabajadores mexicanos están quitando el empleo a los norteamericanos, y eso no es cierto. Lo único que queremos nosotros es seguir trabajando en conjunto, como bien decía el compañero Francisco, mejorar los salarios para que no sea el factor competitivo, que no sea el salario, sino que sea realmente otros factores los que utilicen los empresarios para decidir si invierten en Estados Unidos o en México.
So we're here exactly to this question, hearing a lot about these walls and things, but we're here to build bridges, not walls, because the barriers that people want to put up, all they do is divide us. And, to do the things that we're trying to do with things like raising wages, that's what will really help the relationship between the two countries. So that's our
last question I've got for you. As you point out, we want to raise wages for all workers, and we want to break down some of those barriers that pit us against one another. What are you hoping comes out of this, and what do you want American workers to know about workers in Mexico? Because I think part of the divide is we don't know each other very well. So what do you want them to know?
Yo le quisiera decir a todos nuestros hermanos y hermanas trabajadores de Estados Unidos que
que tenemos que tener mucho cuidado, sobre todo con el discurso que se está dando, de que hay que acabar con el NAFTA. Acabar con el NAFTA no va a ayudar ni a los americanos, ni a los mexicanos, ni a los canadienses. Lo que tenemos que hacer es precisamente revisar bien las condiciones del NAFTA para mejorarlo. De otra manera, el terminarlo como se ha lanzado de alguna manera una amenaza de tumbarlo, habría gran afectación para nuestro país y habría definitivamente también mucha afectación para los trabajadores norteamericanos.
I really want to say to the brothers and sisters here that it's really important to understand that simply tearing up NAFTA, ending NAFTA, destroying NAFTA isn't the answer. There would be a really negative impact for Mexicans, but also in the United States for workers and in Canada. So that's not what we're talking about doing. What we need to do is give a serious look and study at the details of the trade agreement and improve it and make it better and make it work for workers in all three of the countries, because simply saying no to the agreement and ending it overnight would just create a lot of damage for all three countries.
Mario, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm Rick Smith,
Francisco,
and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day striking auto workers in Cleveland, Ohio, defended their picket lines in what is known as the Battle of East 140th Street. Members of UAW Local 45 at GM's Fisher Body Plant had been on strike for 3 weeks. They had joined striking GM workers at 12 plants throughout Michigan. They demanded a supplemental agreement granting skilled workers wage increases, overtime adjustments and seniority, and apprentice provisions. In Cleveland, strikers vowed to stop the scabbing and were mostly successful. Now, at the start of the morning shift, a scab attempted to plow through the picket lines at a high rate of speed. Strikers flooded the gates and brought the scab car to a virtual stop. As they attempted to convince him not to cross through, mounted police viciously charged and attacked the strikers. Police continued to shoot tear gas guns from behind plant gates. Soon, there were more than 5,000 picketers fighting with police as workers poured out from half a dozen nearby plants to support the strikers. For over 2 hours, workers showered strike-breaking forces with bricks, rocks, and paving blocks. They overturned scab cars and drove the police off the street and into the plant. Fighting broke out again in the afternoon when police tried to bring in more tear gas supplies. Strike leaders directed activities from an amplifier on the roof of a nearby restaurant. The next day, famed Prohibition crusader Elliot Ness, now Cleveland's director of public safety, enforced a 500-yard riot zone, banning all gatherings near the gates and limited picketers to 7 at each gate. Strikers began picketing the homes of known scabs and would ratify a new contract just days later. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. You are listening to the best of The Rick Smith Show. If you have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in. And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. This hour, we're going to spend a little time enjoying the week that was. And what a week it was indeed. The first State of the Union address. And I got to be honest with you, right from the start, I fell asleep watching it. There was no energy. There was no... in fact, I looked at it, and as I was watching, it looked to me that he didn't even understand where to break for applause or where the punchlines were half the time. Now, this is a guy who railed on Obama for years about using a teleprompter. So I found his speech to be very interesting, and I'm sure insomniacs the world over were thrilled to have something to fall asleep to. Now, for me, there was a bunch of stuff that I would have liked to have seen in that speech. One, I would have liked to have seen him say, we're going to protect steel. We're going to save the steel industry because, hey, I ran on it. And we're going to move on the 232 case to make sure that American-made steel doesn't go the way of the dinosaurs. Seems like a good start. I didn't see him talk a lot about manufacturing and how, plans to bring jobs back. A little bit about vocational school stuff, but how? Didn't see much of that. Made lip service to infrastructure. And again, the infrastructure plans, always very interesting to me Because understand, we just did a major tax bill, a major tax handout. Call it a heist, call it a scheme, call it robbery, call it whatever you want. But we just gave away about $1.7 trillion over the next decade. That's money that could have easily gone to do, you know what? Rebuild our roads and bridges. Yet what we get out of Donald Trump and what we're getting out of the Republicans is this scheme, is another scam, is another way of going, hey, there's a fairy out there that is going to sprinkle dust on us and going to rebuild our infrastructure. Understand, the only way our infrastructure gets rebuilt is if we rebuild it. These schemes, these scams, these magic plans that we're going to put, $200 billion up and somehow that's going to become $1 trillion. I'm sorry, I'm not really getting that. Unless we're going to put toll booths on every corner, unless we're going to pay huge amounts of rent down the road that we, the taxpayers, eventually pay for anyway. And this is the kind of dishonest stuff that people hate about our politics. We need to rebuild our infrastructure. We're about $4.6 trillion in the hole, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. About $4.6 trillion. And yet we're talking about $200 million and then hope that Wall Street's going to come along. I'll be honest with you. Every scam that they've come up with, every scheme that they've come up with, it seems to be all about Wall Street. It's all about Wall Street, and it's all about sticking it to not just the taxpayers, but to the working people. I saw nothing in his speech that said to me he cared about the middle class, that he cared about a prosperous working class. I didn't see it. I saw some words about unity. I saw lots of division. I saw some words about, this is kind of an idea, but to be honest, they're not his words. They're not his ideas. So how long is it going to take before he forgets it? And we're back at this division point, still not moving forward on our infrastructure, not moving forward on sane trade policies, not moving forward on a lot of things. We're just stuck, what seems like in neutral and in chaos. And the reality is it's always the working people who get the shaft. Across the nation and in my home state of Pennsylvania, there's been a calculated, constant, and extremely well-funded attack on unionized workers and the standard of living of all workers. If politicians and right-wing think tanks aren't attacking the right to organize collectively and bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions, they're attacking unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and prevailing wage laws. These attacks are never, understand, they are never for the benefit of workers. They're not for the benefit of families, not for the benefit of communities, or even taxpayers, as they're often framed, but simply and solely the benefit of corporations and shareholders. There's a new study released by the Midwest Economic Policy Institute that looks at the effects of Indiana repealing its prevailing wage or common construction wage law. And to be honest, it reinforces, I think, everything that we already know. It's more for the wealthy and less for the workers. And here to talk about this latest study is Frank Manzo. Frank is the policy director at the Illinois Economic Policy Institute. Frank, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So, before we get into the meat of your study, which, lots of interesting findings, and I would argue not all that surprising, before we get into it, I think it's important to explain exactly what prevailing wage laws are, maybe discuss a little bit why they're important to local communities. So let's start with Indiana. What was the common construction wage law there in Indiana? How was it calculated, and what did it cover?
Yeah, sure, Rick. And prevailing wage is a law that supports blue-collar construction workers on public construction projects, and that's true across the country. In Indiana, it is essentially a minimum wage for projects supported by Hoosier taxpayers. In Indiana, the rates were determined by the most common construction wage. That's why it's called was called the Common Construction Wage Act. And so what that means is the modal rate. So the rate that's most paid to the most construction workers in a county, and they can do anything else. So everyone must have been paid the same prevailing wage and benefits rates as long as they could do the work, and that's true regardless of demographic characteristics. So that rate was determined democratically at